A homeless Navy SEAL entered a worthless cave and discovered the friend he hated had sacrificed everything for him. Grieving, a homeless Navy SEAL inherited a worthless cave. His dog found what they hid inside. Caleb Hart had lost almost everything: his career, his family, and his place in the world. Living out of an old pickup truck in the Colorado mountains, he thought the last chapter of his life had already been written. But when his loyal canine titan led him into a forgotten cave left behind by a dead teammate, Caleb uncovered a secret buried for 22 years, one powerful enough to change everything he believed about betrayal, loyalty, and forgiveness. Comment 1 if you'd follow your dog into that cave, or 0 if you'd turn back. And tell us where you're watching from. The first snow of October drifted across the parking lot behind the old gas station like scattered ashes. Caleb Hart watched the flakes gather on the windshield of his pickup truck and wondered if winter would finally be the season that broke him. The truck was 23 years old. Rust crept along the wheel wells. The heater only worked when it felt like it. The passenger seat had become a storage shelf for blankets, canned food, dog supplies, and the few possessions Caleb still owned. It was home, at least for now. Beside him, a large German shepherd slept with his head resting on Caleb's thigh. Gray hairs had begun to appear around the dog's muzzle, but Titan still carried himself like the military working dog he had once been. Even asleep, his ears twitched at distant sounds. Always alert, always ready, unlike his owner. Caleb stared through the windshield toward the mountains rising beyond the town of Silver Ridge, Colorado. The peaks were already white. Winter was coming early. He rubbed his hands together and looked at the faded photograph tucked into the dashboard. Not of family, not of children, not of happier times. It was a photograph from another life. A Navy SEAL team standing in the desert sun. Young faces, confident smiles, brothers. Most were gone now. Some buried, some broken, some forgotten. Caleb reached forward and turned the photograph face down. He hadn't looked at it in months. A sharp knock on the driver's window made Titan's head snap up instantly. The dog was awake in a heartbeat. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "It's okay," Caleb said softly. Titan relaxed but continued watching. Outside stood a woman in a dark coat, professional, middle-aged, holding a leather briefcase. Caleb frowned. Nobody came looking for him. Nobody even knew where to find him. The woman gestured politely. Caleb lowered the window a few inches. Cold air rushed inside. "Mr. Hart, depends who's asking. My name is Margaret Ellis." She held up a business card. "I'm an attorney." Caleb almost laughed. An attorney for a homeless veteran sleeping behind a gas station. That was a new one. "What do you want?" "I've been trying to find you for nearly 3 weeks. Congratulations, you found me." Margaret hesitated. Something in her expression immediately put Caleb on edge. Not pity, not judgment, something closer to regret. "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Daniel Mercer passed away." The words hit harder than Caleb expected. Not because he loved Daniel, not because he missed him. Because some wounds never truly healed. They only scarred over. And hearing that name felt like ripping the scar open with a knife. Daniel Mercer, former Navy SEAL, former best friend, former brother. The man Caleb blamed for destroying his life. For several seconds he said nothing. Snow drifted between them. Titan watched silently. Finally, Caleb asked one question. "When?" "6 weeks ago." "How?" "Heart failure." Caleb stared at her. Heart failure. Not combat, not violence. Not some dramatic ending. Just a heart that finally stopped beating. The silence stretched. Margaret slowly opened her briefcase. "There is another matter. There's always another matter. You were named in his will." That actually made Caleb laugh. A short, bitter sound. "Wrong, Caleb Hart." "No." She removed a folder. "It specifically names you." Caleb looked away toward the mountains. 22 years. 22 years without a single conversation. Without a phone call. Without an apology, without an explanation, and now Daniel was reaching into his life from the grave. "What did he leave me?" Caleb asked. Margaret opened the folder. Her answer surprised even her. "A cave." Caleb blinked. "A what?" "A cave. You're serious?" "Yes." For the first time all afternoon, Even Titan tilted his head as if confused. Margaret continued. It sits on a parcel of land in the San Juan Mountains, approximately 40 acres. The only structure listed is a natural cave formation. Caleb stared at her, then he laughed again. Longer this time, harsher. A cave. The man had spent 2 decades ruining his life and somehow managed one final insult. A cave. I'm afraid that's correct. No money? No. Property? No. Investments? No. Just a hole in a mountain. Margaret nodded. Just the cave. The wind blew harder. Snow swirled through the parking lot. Caleb suddenly felt tired. More tired than he had in years. Daniel Mercer was dead, and the last thing he'd left behind was a worthless cave. Somehow that felt exactly right. Why me? Caleb asked. Margaret looked down at the folder. There was a note. His stomach tightened. A note. Of course there was. She handed over a single folded page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniels. Older, less steady, but still Daniels. Caleb unfolded it. Only one sentence appeared. If you're reading this, the cave belongs to you now. The truth is waiting inside. Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. No goodbye. Just that. The truth is waiting inside. Caleb folded the paper and shoved it back into the envelope. His jaw tightened. 22 years ago there had been a mission. A classified operation. A disaster. Careers destroyed. Lives shattered. And afterward Daniel had disappeared while Caleb took the fall. At least that was the story Caleb had carried ever since. He had lost everything. His career, his marriage, his home, his future. Now Daniel was dead, and apparently wanted one final conversation. Too late. Far too late. I'll sign whatever I need to sign. Margaret looked surprised. That's all? What else is there? You aren't curious. Caleb looked toward the mountains again. Toward the storm gathering over distant peaks. Toward memories he had spent 22 years trying to bury. No, he said. The lie sounded hollow even to him. Margaret handed him the documents. He signed them. One signature, then another. The entire inheritance transferred in less than 3 minutes. When it was finished, she closed her briefcase. Will you visit it? The cave? Yes. Caleb glanced down at Titan. The old dog stared back at him with calm brown eyes. Then he looked toward the mountains. Toward whatever secrets Daniel Mercer had carried into the grave. Finally, he nodded. One trip. Margaret waited. Then what? Caleb's expression hardened. Then I seal it shut. The snow continued falling. The mountains disappeared behind a curtain of white. And somewhere high above the town, hidden among cliffs and pine forests, a cave waited in silence. Neither Caleb nor Titan could possibly know that everything they believed about the past was about to be shattered, or that the journey waiting in those mountains would change both of their lives forever. For now, all Caleb knew was this. Daniel Mercer was dead. The cave was worthless, and he intended to visit it exactly once, then forget the man forever. At least that was the plan. The mountains had other ideas. By sunrise the next morning, a hard frost coated the edges of Caleb Hart's windshield. The old pickup sat alone beside a stand of pine trees on the outskirts of Silver Ridge, its faded blue paint almost silver beneath the cold morning light. The world was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence Caleb had never trusted. He sat behind the steering wheel, staring at the folded map. Margaret Ellis had given him before leaving town. A red circle marked the location of Daniel Mercer's cave deep within the San Juan Mountains. One trip. That was all. Drive up, look around, sign whatever final paperwork was necessary. Seal the entrance, leave. Simple. Except nothing involving Daniel Mercer had ever been simple. A heavy sigh escaped him. Beside him, Titan lifted his head. The German shepherd studied him carefully. The dog always seemed to know when the darkness was creeping in. You don't have to look at me like that, Caleb muttered. Titan continued staring. Caleb shook his head. Yeah, I know. The dog laid his chin on Caleb's knee. The gesture was familiar, comforting, dangerous, because it made Caleb feel things he preferred not to feel. For years, Titan had been the only reason he kept moving, the only reason he got out of bed, the only reason he kept fighting. When his marriage collapsed, when the nightmares got worse, when the panic attacks came without warning, when the bottle almost became more important than breathing, Titan had stayed. Dogs didn't care about broken careers, or damaged reputations, or mistakes. They cared about loyalty. And Titan had never stopped being loyal. Caleb started the truck. The engine groaned before finally catching. A cloud of exhaust drifted into the frozen air. The journey began. The road wound west through mountain valleys blanketed in snow-dusted pine forests. Small ranches appeared occasionally between stretches of wilderness. Weathered fences cut across open meadows where elk grazed in the distance. Beautiful country. The kind of landscape people put on postcards. The kind of place that could make a man feel peaceful. But peace rarely lasted long inside Caleb's head. By midday, the mountains grew larger, closer. The peaks rose like ancient stone giants against a pale blue sky. Titan sat upright now, watching, waiting. Something about the dog felt different. More alert than usual. More focused, Caleb noticed, but said nothing. Hours later, they stopped beside a frozen lake. Caleb stepped out to stretch his legs. The cold air bit into his lungs. Titan immediately jumped down and began patrolling the shoreline. His movements were slower these days. Age was catching him, but not by much. The dog still carried himself with quiet confidence. Caleb walked to the water's edge. The frozen surface reflected the mountains perfectly. For a moment, everything felt still. Then a sound shattered the calm. A helicopter, not real, only in his head. The memory hit without warning. Rotor blades, gunfire, radio chatter, smoke, chaos. Caleb's heartbeat accelerated instantly. His breathing became shallow. The frozen lake disappeared. The mountains disappeared. Suddenly he was somewhere else. Another country, another life, another nightmare. Men shouting, explosions, the smell of dust and burning fuel. The mission. The mission that destroyed everything. A sharp bark cut through the flashback. Titan. The dog was already moving toward him. Fast, focused, trained. Caleb felt the German shepherd press against his leg. Solid, real, present. Titan nudged his hand once, twice, again. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. "Not now," he whispered. The panic tightened its grip. Titan refused to leave. The dog leaned harder against him, grounding him, anchoring him, bringing him back. Slowly the sounds faded. The imagined helicopter disappeared. The frozen lake returned. The mountains returned. Reality returned. Caleb exhaled shakily. Titan sat beside him, watching, waiting, making sure. "Good boy," Caleb said quietly. The words barely escaped his throat. He rubbed the dog's neck. Titan's tail moved once, just once, enough. For several minutes they stood together beside the frozen water, a veteran and his dog. Two survivors carrying scars no one else could see. Eventually, Caleb climbed back into the truck. The road climbed higher. Snowbanks grew deeper. Cell service disappeared. Civilization faded behind them. By late afternoon, they entered truly remote country. Towering pines lined both sides of the narrow mountain road. Cliffs rose above them. Deep valleys dropped away below. The world felt untouched, ancient, forgotten. The map indicated they were less than 10 miles from the cave. That was when Titan changed. The German shepherd suddenly stood. His ears snapped forward. Every muscle in his body tightened. Caleb frowned. "What is it?" Titan stared through the windshield, focused on something invisible, something ahead. The dog began whining softly. Not frightened, not distressed, anticipating, almost excited. Caleb had heard every sound Titan could make. This one was new. The dog moved closer to the dashboard. His nose worked constantly, sniffing the air, searching. Caleb felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. "You smell something?" Titan's tail flicked. The whining continued. Mile after mile, the behavior grew stronger. The closer they came to the cave, the stranger Titan became. The dog no longer seemed tired, or old, or slow. He seemed energized, driven, as though something ahead mattered deeply to him. The sun was setting when they finally reached the end of the road. A rusted gate blocked the narrow trail beyond. The mountains glowed orange beneath the dying light. Long shadows stretched across the snow. The wilderness felt endless. Caleb killed the engine. Silence settled around them. Titan immediately jumped from the truck. The dog landed in the snow and began scanning the surrounding forest. Alert, focused, ready. Caleb stepped out and studied the map. According to Margaret's directions, the cave sat roughly 3 miles beyond the gate, too far to reach before dark. They would have to camp, then make the final approach in the morning. "Looks like we're staying here tonight, partner." Titan barely acknowledged him. Instead, the dog turned toward the mountains, toward the darkness gathering among the trees, toward the direction of the cave. Then something unusual happened. Titan sat down facing the distant peaks and refused to move. For nearly an hour, the dog remained there, watching, waiting, as though he knew exactly where they were and exactly what waited ahead. Caleb stood beside the campfire after sunset and followed Titan's gaze. The mountains were little more than black silhouettes now, silent, cold, mysterious. Somewhere up there was Daniel Mercer's cave, a worthless hole in the mountain. Or so Caleb kept telling himself. Yet as he looked at Titan sitting motionless in the snow, staring into the darkness with unwavering attention, a troubling thought entered his mind. What if Daniel had left behind more than a cave? Titan let out a low whine, not of fear, not of warning, something else, something Caleb couldn't understand. The old soldier watched the mountains. The old dog watched them too, and somewhere beyond the darkness, hidden among cliffs and ancient stone, the next chapter of Daniel Mercer's secret was waiting. Neither of them knew it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. The cold arrived long before dawn. It settled across the mountains like a living thing, covering the world in frost and silence. Caleb Hart woke in the driver's seat of his pickup truck with a sharp breath. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The familiar confusion lingered. Darkness, cold, a racing heartbeat. Then reality slowly returned. The mountains, the cave, Daniel Mercer, Titan. The German shepherd was already awake. The dog sat upright in the passenger seat, staring through the windshield toward the wilderness beyond the gate. Watching, waiting, exactly as he had the night before. Caleb checked his watch, 5:37. The eastern horizon was only beginning to glow. "You planning on sleeping at all?" he asked. Titan glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to the mountains. Caleb shook his head. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Within 30 minutes they were moving. The trail beyond the gate climbed steadily through dense pine forest. Snow crunched beneath Caleb's boots. Their breath drifted through the freezing air in pale clouds. The mountains felt different in daylight. Bigger, older, the silence deeper. Every sound seemed amplified. The snap of a branch, the distant cry of a hawk, the wind moving through the trees. Titan moved ahead confidently, his tail held level, his pace steady. The dog no longer looked uncertain. He looked like he knew exactly where he was going. That bothered Caleb more than he cared to admit. By mid-morning they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen valley. The view was breathtaking. Thousands of acres of untouched wilderness stretched beneath a pale winter sky. Rock walls rose from the forest like giant stone fortresses. Snow glittered across the landscape. Far below, a river cut through the valley like a silver ribbon. And there, halfway up a granite cliff, sat the cave. Caleb stopped walking. The entrance was larger than he expected, perhaps 12 feet high. A dark wound carved into the face of the mountain. Ancient, silent, watching. For reasons he couldn't explain, a chill crawled down his spine. Titan immediately started forward, eager, focused, almost impatient, easy. The dog ignored him. Caleb frowned. Titan never ignored commands. Not once in 10 years. Not until now. The closer they approached the cave, the more restless the German shepherd became. His ears remained forward. His nose worked constantly. His pace increased. Caleb felt unease building inside him. The entire situation felt wrong. A dead teammate, a worthless cave, a dog acting like he was returning home. Nothing about it made sense. The cave entrance stood in deep shadow when they finally arrived. Blackberry vines covered part of the opening. Snow had gathered around massive boulders nearby. The place looked abandoned, forgotten, exactly what Caleb expected. "Well," he muttered, "this is it." Titan was already sniffing around the entrance. Caleb removed a flashlight from his pack. He had brought plywood measurements, tools, everything necessary to permanently seal the opening. One visit, then done. That had been the agreement he'd made with himself. But first he needed to look inside. Just enough to satisfy curiosity, no more. He stepped closer. Cold air drifted out from the darkness. The smell of stone and earth reached him immediately. Something ancient, something untouched. Titan froze. Every muscle tightened. Then it happened. Without warning, the German shepherd bolted straight into the cave. Titan! The dog vanished into darkness. Caleb stared in disbelief. Titan! No response. Only silence, then faintly. The sound of claws striking stone. Moving deeper, farther away. Caleb's pulse accelerated. This wasn't possible. Titan was one of the most disciplined dogs he'd ever known. Years of military training. Years of service. Years of absolute obedience. Yet somehow Daniel Mercer's cave had changed everything. The dog simply disappeared. A knot formed in Caleb's stomach. He took several steps toward the entrance. The darkness seemed deeper now, more threatening. And suddenly another memory surfaced. Not a nightmare this time. A real memory. A tunnel overseas, collapsed concrete, dust filling the air, a trapped teammate screaming for help, hours buried underground, waiting for rescue, waiting to breathe. The memory struck hard. Claustrophobia tightened around his chest. Even after all these years, confined spaces still triggered something primal inside him. His palms grew damp, his breathing shortened. For a moment he considered leaving. Titan would find his own way out. The dog always did. But the thought disappeared as quickly as it came. Titan had saved his life more times than he could count. Walking away wasn't an option. Caleb switched on the flashlight. A bright beam sliced through the darkness. Titan, his voice echoed. Nothing, only silence. Then somewhere deeper inside, a single bark. Caleb closed his eyes. Damn it! He stepped into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. The outside world vanished behind him. Stone walls surrounded him. The flashlight revealed rough granite marked by age and moisture. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed endlessly. The passage extended farther than he expected. Much farther. Daniel's note returned to his mind. The truth is waiting inside. Caleb pushed the thought away. The truth, whatever that meant. He followed the sound of Titan's movement. The tunnel twisted gradually downward, then widened, then narrowed again. More than once he considered turning around. More than once old panic threatened to surface. But Titan's occasional bark kept pulling him forward. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The cave should not have been this large. Nothing in the property records suggested a system this extensive. Caleb slowed. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then the passage suddenly opened. His flashlight beam swept across empty space. Caleb stopped. The chamber was enormous, at least 40 feet across. Natural stone columns rose from the floor. The ceiling disappeared into darkness overhead. The place looked more like a cathedral than a cave, and there in the center of the chamber sat Titan, waiting, perfectly calm. The dog wasn't trapped, wasn't injured, wasn't frightened. He simply sat beside a large wooden crate. Caleb's breath caught. The crate wasn't alone. As his flashlight moved across the chamber, more objects appeared. Wooden boxes, military footlockers, storage trunks, shelving, everything organized carefully, methodically, protected from moisture, protected from time. Someone had spent years building this place, years maintaining it, years preserving whatever secrets lay hidden inside. Titan rose slowly. His tail moved once, then he looked directly at Caleb, almost as if he were saying, "You finally made it." Caleb stared at the chamber. His pulse thundered in his ears. Nothing about this looked abandoned. Nothing about this looked worthless. The cave wasn't empty. Someone had transformed it into a hidden archive, a hidden vault, a hidden memory, and every instinct Caleb possessed told him only one person could have done it. Daniel Mercer. The realization hit harder than expected. 22 years. 22 years without speaking, and somehow Daniel had been here. Building this, protecting this, preparing this. For whom? For what? The flashlight beam moved across the nearest military markings, old but preserved. His stomach tightened. Titan walked to the crate and sat beside it again. Patient, waiting, the same way he waited for commands during deployments. The same way he waited beside wounded soldiers. The same way he waited beside Caleb during panic attacks. Except this time the dog wasn't waiting for orders. He was waiting for discovery. Caleb slowly approached. Dust covered the crate, but not much. Someone had maintained it recently. His hand touched the wood. Cold, solid, real. Questions flooded his mind. Why had Daniel left all of this behind? Why give him the cave? Why now? And perhaps most unsettling of all, how did Titan know exactly where to go? The old dog watched him carefully. Caleb looked down at his companion, then back at the crate. Something inside him shifted. Not trust, not forgiveness, not yet, but curiosity. The first crack in a wall he had spent 22 years building. Outside, the mountain stood silent beneath the winter sky. Inside, beneath thousands of tons of ancient stone, Caleb Hart stared at the first secret Daniel Mercer had left behind. And for the first time since receiving the inheritance, he realized something unsettling. The cave wasn't waiting for him. It had been waiting for years, waiting for this exact moment, waiting for him. And whatever truth Daniel had buried here was finally beginning to surface. For a long moment, Caleb Hart simply stood there. The beam of his flashlight drifted across the hidden chamber, while silence pressed in from every direction. The cave felt alive somehow, not dangerous, not threatening, present, as if the mountain itself had been guarding these memories for years. Titan remained seated beside the wooden crate, patient, certain. The old German shepherd looked less like a dog waiting for instructions and more like a guide leading someone toward a destination. Caleb wasn't sure he liked that feeling. He approached slowly. The crate was military surplus, old, weathered, yet remarkably well preserved. A faded stencil remained visible on the side, U.S. Navy. The sight immediately stirred something deep inside him. A life he rarely allowed himself to remember. A life that now felt as distant as another century. He crouched beside the crate. Titan's tail moved once. The dog watched him carefully. "What did he leave in here?" Caleb muttered. The metal latch resisted at first, then released with a soft metallic click. The sound echoed through the cavern. Caleb lifted the lid, his breath caught. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs, carefully organized, protected inside waterproof sleeves. The first image showed a group of young men standing in front of a training facility in Coronado. Sunlight, sweat, confidence, the beginning of everything. Caleb recognized every face. Some were dead now, others scattered across the country. A few had simply disappeared. Then his eyes landed on two young men standing shoulder to shoulder, himself and Daniel Mercer, both smiling, both covered in sand, both exhausted, both believing they would conquer the world. Caleb stared at the image. The years vanished. For a moment he was 23 again, strong, fearless, certain of who he was. Daniel's arm rested across his shoulder. The gesture looked effortless, natural, the way brothers stood, not merely teammates, brothers. Caleb swallowed hard. His jaw tightened. He set the photograph aside. Beneath it lay dozens more: training exercises, graduations, deployment photos, holiday gatherings, team celebrations. Every stage of their military careers, every chapter of their friendship, every memory Caleb had spent years trying to bury. Yet here they were, preserved, protected, saved. A strange ache settled inside his chest. Daniel had kept all of them, every single one. Why? The question refused to leave. Caleb reached deeper into the crate. His fingers found a small leather notebook. The cover was worn smooth from use. He recognized it immediately. His stomach tightened. No way, it was Daniel's deployment journal, the one he'd carried overseas, the one Caleb had assumed was lost years ago. Slowly he opened it. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, mission notes, personal observations, small details most people would never notice. Then he saw his own name, Caleb, written repeatedly, page after page, entry after entry. The first passage was dated 27 years earlier. Hell Week nearly broke us today. Caleb carried 2 extra packs after Henderson collapsed. Never complained once. If I ever get into trouble, that's the man I want beside me. Caleb froze. Another entry, Afghanistan, long patrol. Caleb shared his water after mine froze. Didn't even mention it. That's who he is. Another. Worst day of deployment so far. Caleb saved 3 civilians under fire. He'll never talk about it because that's not how he's built. Caleb stopped reading. His vision blurred unexpectedly. The cave suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Titan quietly moved closer. The dog's shoulder brushed against his arm, grounding him, reminding him where he was. Caleb rubbed his face. This wasn't what he'd expected. Not at all. He'd expected bitterness, accusations, justifications. Instead, he found admiration, respect, friendship, the kind of friendship he'd convinced himself never existed. He looked around the chamber. More crates waited nearby. More secrets, more answers, or perhaps more questions. The next container was a military footlocker. Its contents were even more surprising. Challenge coins, mission patches, training certificates, awards. Most belonged to Daniel, but several belonged to Caleb. Items he hadn't seen in decades. One challenge coin immediately caught his attention. A silver coin from their first deployment together. Caleb had lost it during a move years ago. At least he thought he had. Now it sat here, polished, protected, preserved, as though Daniel had been safeguarding it all this time. His heartbeat quickened. None of this made sense. If Daniel truly betrayed him, why keep all of this? Why preserve decades of memories? Why protect items that belonged to someone he supposedly betrayed? The narrative Caleb had carried for 22 years began developing cracks. Tiny cracks, but cracks nonetheless. He hated that feeling. Because certainty was comfortable. Anger was comfortable. Hatred was easy. Confusion was not. The next discovery hit even harder. At the bottom of the footlocker rested a folded American flag, perfectly preserved. A note sat beneath it. Caleb unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's. Keep this safe for him. If anything happens to me, he deserves it. No signature, no explanation, only that. Caleb stared at the note, then at the flag. The room seemed to spin briefly. Daniel had written those words years ago. Maybe decades, long before the will, long before the cave, long before his death. The implication unsettled him. Daniel had been thinking about him all this time, watching from a distance, remembering, caring. The realization angered him and hurt him. Both emotions collided together. If you cared so much, Caleb whispered into the darkness, why didn't you call? The cave offered no answer, only silence, the silence of stone, the silence of time. Titan suddenly stood. The German shepherd walked toward another shelf, then looked back. Waiting, Caleb followed. More photographs, more journals, more evidence of a friendship he had spent decades pretending never mattered. One photograph stopped him completely. The image showed a Christmas gathering near a military base. Most of the team stood together around a tree, everyone smiling, everyone laughing. The date written on the back made his chest tighten. December 2003. The first Christmas after the mission. The first Christmas after everything fell apart. The first Christmas after Caleb and Daniel stopped speaking. Yet Daniel had kept the photo, and someone had circled Caleb's face in blue ink. Not mockingly, not angrily, almost lovingly, as if Daniel couldn't bear losing sight of him. Caleb sat down heavily on a nearby crate. The flashlight rested across his knees. Titan lowered himself beside him. The dog's warm body pressed against his leg. Outside, the sun was slowly descending beyond the mountains. The cave darkened. Shadows lengthened across the chamber. Yet Caleb barely noticed. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking not about betrayal, but about friendship. About the countless nights Daniel had stood beside him. The missions, the hardships, the laughter, the brotherhood. Had all of it really been a lie? The answer no longer seemed obvious, and that terrified him. Because if Daniel wasn't the villain Caleb had spent 22 years blaming, then who was? Titan lifted his head suddenly. His ears turned toward the deeper sections of the cave. The dog listened carefully, then stood. A low whine escaped him. Not fear, not warning. Something closer to encouragement. As though he knew there was more to discover. Much more. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. Beyond the chamber, another passage disappeared into darkness. Another tunnel. Another secret, another piece of Daniel Mercer's story waiting beneath the mountain. And despite himself, Caleb wanted answers. For the first time since receiving the inheritance, he wasn't thinking about sealing the cave. He wasn't thinking about leaving. He wasn't even thinking about Daniel's betrayal. He was thinking about a far more unsettling possibility. What if Daniel Mercer had never stopped being his friend? The thought lingered in the darkness as Titan moved toward the next tunnel, waiting, leading, guiding him deeper, and somewhere beyond the shadows, another revelation was waiting, one that would shake Caleb far more than anything he had found so far. The tunnel narrowed as it descended deeper into the mountain. Caleb followed Titan through the darkness, his flashlight cutting a pale path across stone walls that had not seen sunlight in centuries. The air grew colder, drier, still. The hidden chamber of photographs and military memories slowly disappeared behind them. Yet its discoveries lingered. Every photograph, every journal entry, every preserved memory, all of it continued to chip away at the story Caleb had told himself for 22 years. The story where Daniel Mercer was the villain. The story where betrayal explained everything. The story where hatred was easier than grief. Titan moved steadily ahead, confident, purposeful. The dog never hesitated, never paused, never seemed uncertain. It was as though he had traveled this route before. The thought returned again, uncomfortable, impossible, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. The passage eventually opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, more organized, more deliberate. This room felt less like a museum, more like an office. Wooden shelves lined the walls. Metal filing cabinets stood neatly arranged in rows. Waterproof containers sat stacked beside them. Everything was labeled, everything cataloged, everything preserved. Caleb's stomach tightened. Daniel had not built this place randomly. This had taken years, maybe decades. Titan walked directly toward one particular cabinet, then sat beside it, waiting again. Caleb exhaled slowly. "What are you trying to show me?" The dog simply stared. Caleb opened the cabinet. Inside were dozens of folders, names, dates, records. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Property taxes, insurance statements, medical invoices, utility bills, normal paperwork. Then he noticed a familiar address, his own. The old cabin he had lost 12 years ago. The cabin the bank had foreclosed on after his life collapsed. His heartbeat quickened. Caleb pulled the folder free. The date matched exactly. 12 years earlier. The worst period of his life. The months after his divorce. The months after homelessness. The months when PTSD nearly swallowed him whole. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the file. Inside were foreclosure notices, late payment records, mortgage statements, legal correspondence, documents he remembered receiving, documents he remembered ignoring, documents that had eventually taken everything away. Except something was different. Additional paperwork appeared attached to the originals. Checks, receipts, payment confirmations, large payments, regular payments, year after year. Caleb stared, confused, then stunned. Someone had been making mortgage payments, not all of them, but enough to delay foreclosure, enough to buy him time, enough to keep him afloat longer than he ever realized. He sat down heavily on a nearby crate. The mountain seemed to tilt around him. No, the word escaped as a whisper. He kept reading. More documents, more payments, more records. Different years, different crises, different disasters. Yet always the same anonymous benefactor. The same initials, DM Daniel Mercer. The room became silent. Titan lowered himself beside Caleb. The dog's warm shoulder pressed against his leg, grounding him, keeping him present, because suddenly Caleb felt like he might lose his balance. His mind drifted backward, back to those terrible years, sleeping in motels, sleeping in vehicles, fighting nightmares, ignoring phone calls, avoiding people, believing nobody cared whether he survived, believing he was completely alone, yet apparently he wasn't, not entirely. Another folder caught his eye. Hospital records. His name appeared across the front. Caleb frowned, then opened it. His stomach dropped. The memories returned instantly. A psychiatric treatment center in Denver. 11 years ago, the lowest point of his life, a place he rarely allowed himself to remember. 3 weeks of treatment after a severe mental health crisis. 3 weeks he had somehow paid for, despite having almost no money. For years, he assumed veteran assistance programs covered the expenses. Now the paperwork told a different story. The bills had been paid privately. Every dollar, every treatment, every medication, every counseling session. The payer's name appeared clearly, Daniel Mercer. Caleb closed his eyes. A sharp pain settled behind them. The memory of that time felt raw even now. He remembered sitting alone in a small room, broken, hopeless, certain that life would never improve, certain nobody cared, certain nobody was watching, and all along, Daniel had known. Daniel had been helping, silently, from the shadows, without asking for recognition, without expecting gratitude, without even revealing himself. "Why?" Caleb whispered. The question echoed softly through the chamber. No answer came. Only silence. The silence felt heavier now, sadder. The next file nearly broke him. Veterinary records, Titan's name, years of veterinary care, emergency treatment, medication, surgeries, the old dog's entire medical history. Caleb frowned. He knew some of these bills, or thought he did. Many came from periods when money was dangerously tight, years when he barely managed to feed himself. Yet somehow Titan always received care, always received treatment, always got what he needed. Caleb had never questioned it. Now the answers sat in front of him. Daniel Mercer had paid the bills, quietly, consistently, for years. His vision blurred. Titan rested his head on Caleb's knee. The dog seemed unaware of the paperwork, unaware of the revelations, yet somehow perfectly aware of Caleb's pain. The German shepherd remained still, present, loyal, just as he always had been. A loose sheet of paper slipped from one folder and landed on the floor. Caleb picked it up, his breath caught. A handwritten note. Daniel's handwriting, older than the others, Shakir, but unmistakable. It read, "If anything happens to me, make sure Titan never goes without care." He saved Caleb too many times to count. The words struck like a hammer. Caleb stared at them, again and again and again. Then something unexpected happened. Anger surfaced, hot, sudden, powerful. He stood abruptly, the note crumpled in his fist. "Damn you, Daniel." His voice echoed through the chamber. "Damn you." Titan looked up, concerned, confused. Caleb paced the room. The emotions collided violently. Anger, grief, confusion, guilt, all tangled together. If Daniel cared this much, why stay away? Why spend 2 decades hiding? Why help from a distance instead of showing up? Why preserve friendship while allowing silence to continue? None of it made sense. The old story was crumbling, yet the new story felt impossible. Daniel Mercer had quietly protected him for years, financially, emotionally, practically. The evidence was undeniable. The man Caleb hated may have been the only reason he survived. The realization felt unbearable. Titan rose and followed him. The dog nudged his hand, then again and again, persistent, patient, the same way he always responded when Caleb struggled. Eventually, Caleb stopped pacing. His breathing slowed. He looked down at the German shepherd. Titan's eyes met his, steady, trusting, loyal. Caleb rubbed the dog's ears. A painful smile briefly appeared. "You knew him better than I did, didn't you?" Titan's tail moved once. The answer meant nothing, yet somehow it felt like everything. Caleb looked around the chamber again. The filing cabinets, the folders, the records, the evidence. Daniel Mercer had spent years protecting him. Not once, not twice, for decades. And if that was true, then what else had Caleb been wrong about? The thought unsettled him deeply. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber, more answers waited. More secrets, more revelations. The mountain wasn't finished with him yet. Neither was Daniel Mercer. And for the first time since entering the cave, Caleb felt something more dangerous than anger. Hope. A tiny fragile thing, barely alive, but present. And that frightened him more than anything else. Because hope meant the truth might be far more complicated than hatred. And complicated truths had a way of changing everything. By the time Caleb Hart finally emerged from the cave, the winter sun was already sinking behind the western peaks. The mountains glowed orange and gold. Long shadows stretched across the snow-covered valley. For several seconds, he simply stood at the entrance, blinking, adjusting to daylight, adjusting to reality. The cold air felt sharper now, cleaner, as though the mountain had changed him somehow. Titan stepped out beside him. The old German shepherd paused and sniffed the wind. Immediately, his posture changed. His ears rose, his muscles tightened. The relaxed calm he'd shown inside the cave vanished. Caleb noticed instantly. "What is it?" Titan stared toward the distant tree line, motionless, watching. A familiar sensation stirred inside Caleb, the same instinct that had kept him alive through deployments. The feeling that someone was observing, the feeling that danger existed just beyond sight. He slowly scanned the valley. Nothing, only pine forests, snow, cliffs, silence. Yet the feeling remained. Titan growled softly, low, barely audible. That alone was enough. Titan never wasted energy. If the dog sensed something, Caleb paid attention. The former seal carefully studied the terrain. Then he saw it, far below, near the access road. A flash of sunlight reflecting off glass. A vehicle, black, parked where no vehicle should be. His heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, from focus. The same cold awareness that military training had built years ago. The vehicle remained motionless, too far away to identify clearly. Yet something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. "Come on." Titan immediately moved beside him. Together they began descending the mountain. The entire way down, Caleb felt watched. Every few minutes he glanced behind him. Nothing, no movement, no visible threat. Yet the sensation persisted. The mountains themselves seemed to be holding their breath. By the time they reached the trailhead, darkness had begun creeping across the valley. The black SUV was gone. Only tire tracks remained, fresh, recent. Caleb crouched beside them. Large vehicle, expensive tires, not local ranch equipment, not hunting traffic, not tourists. Something else. Titan sniffed the tracks, then whined softly. The dog clearly recognized the scent. But from where? Caleb's unease deepened. He loaded his gear into the truck. The cave documents remained hidden beneath blankets and supplies. Something told him not to discuss them. Not yet. The drive back toward Silver Ridge felt longer than before. The mountains seemed darker, the roads emptier, the questions multiplying. Daniel Mercer had spent years protecting secrets. Now Caleb was beginning to understand why. When he finally reached town, snow had begun falling. Large flakes drifted beneath streetlights. Silver Ridge looked exactly like the kind of place people imagined when they thought about small town. Colorado, a diner, a hardware store, a gas station, a church, a few hundred people, nothing remarkable. And yet tonight something felt different. Caleb parked beside the diner. Titan jumped down beside him. The smell of coffee and grilled food drifted into the cold night air. For the first time all day, Caleb realized he was starving. Inside, warmth wrapped around him immediately. Conversations filled the room. Old country music played softly from a speaker. Several locals glanced toward him, then toward Titan, then looked away. The dog was impossible to miss. A retired military K9 carried himself differently than ordinary dogs. Titan seemed to understand every room he entered, every threat, every mood. Caleb ordered coffee and a hot meal. He had barely taken his first bite when someone approached his table. Sheriff Wade Collins, mid-60s, weathered face, gray mustache, former Army. A man Caleb vaguely remembered from years ago. The sheriff removed his hat. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb nodded. The sheriff settled into the booth across from him. For several moments, neither man spoke. Titan watched carefully, not hostile, not relaxed either, evaluating. Finally, Collins sighed. "You were up at Mercer's cave. It wasn't a question." Caleb looked up slowly. "Maybe." The sheriff nodded. "I figured." Silence followed. Then Collins leaned slightly forward. "You find anything interesting?" Caleb immediately felt his guard rise. The sheriff noticed. A faint smile crossed his face. "Relax. I'm not here to take anything." "Then why are you here?" Collins stared through the diner window at the falling snow. "Because Daniel Mercer was a good man." The words landed unexpectedly. Caleb said nothing. The sheriff continued. "Most people thought he kept to himself because he was antisocial. He wasn't. What was he? Tired. The answer surprised Caleb. Collins looked older suddenly, sadder. As far as I could tell, he spent 20 years carrying something heavy. Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. The sheriff glanced around the diner before lowering his voice. You need to be careful. That got Caleb's attention. Careful of what? Collins hesitated, then spoke. People have been asking questions. What people? Businessmen. The word sounded wrong coming from the sheriff, like he didn't believe it himself. Businessmen from where? Denver mostly. Collins leaned closer. Frontier Ridge Development. The name meant nothing to Caleb. Apparently the sheriff noticed. They've been trying to buy mountain property around here for years. What does that have to do with Daniel? The sheriff studied him carefully. Everything. Snow tapped softly against the diner windows. The conversations around them continued. Yet suddenly Caleb felt isolated, as though the rest of the world had disappeared. Collins lowered his voice further. 3 months before Daniel died, those people started showing up more often. How often? Every week. Caleb frowned. What did they want? The sheriff's expression darkened. Nobody knows. Titan suddenly lifted his head, alert, focused. His gaze locked onto something outside. Instantly, Caleb turned. A black SUV rolled slowly past the diner. The same model he'd seen near the mountain, the same dark windows, the same unsettling feeling. The vehicle didn't stop, didn't slow, just continued down the street. But Caleb saw it, and Titan saw it too. The sheriff followed his gaze, then quietly muttered something under his breath. What? Collins looked uncomfortable. That's one of them. The words settled like ice. The black SUV disappeared around a corner, gone. Yet somehow its presence lingered. Caleb's instincts screamed. The same instincts that had survived combat. The same instincts that recognized surveillance, observation, interest. Someone was watching. The sheriff stood. Daniel told me something once. Caleb looked up. Collins adjusted his hat. He said if anything ever happened to him. The sheriff paused. Someone would eventually come looking for what he left behind. Caleb felt the room grow very still. What exactly did he leave behind? Collins studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. If I knew, I wouldn't be alive to tell you. The answer wasn't comforting, not even slightly. The sheriff dropped a business card on the table, then stood. If anybody follows you, if anyone starts asking questions, if anything feels wrong. He nodded toward the card. Call me. Then he left, just like that. The diner returned to normal. Conversations, coffee, laughter. But Caleb no longer heard any of it. Titan remained focused on the window, watching, waiting. The black SUV never returned. Yet long after the sheriff disappeared into the snow, Caleb sat motionless, thinking. The cave, the documents, the memories, Daniel's sacrifices, and now, Frontier Ridge Development. The pieces didn't fit together. Not yet, but they were getting closer. Closer to something important. Closer to something dangerous. Outside, snow continued falling across Silver Ridge, covering roads, covering tracks, covering secrets. Somewhere in the darkness beyond town, powerful people were searching for something Daniel Mercer had protected for decades. And now that responsibility belonged to Caleb, whether he wanted it or not. Titan suddenly rested his head against Caleb's leg. The old dog seemed unusually serious, almost concerned. Caleb looked down. The German shepherd's eyes met his, steady, loyal, protective. The same eyes that had carried him through war, through PTSD, through homelessness, through every disaster life had thrown at him. For reasons he couldn't explain, Caleb felt certain of one thing. The mountain wasn't finished revealing its secrets, and whoever was watching them wasn't going away. Not until they found whatever Daniel Mercer had died protecting. Snow fell through most of the night. By morning, Silver Ridge looked buried beneath a blanket of white. The rooftops, the roads, the pine trees, everything softened beneath fresh snow. But Caleb Hart barely noticed. He had slept only a few hours. The cave haunted him, the photographs, the journals, the evidence that Daniel Mercer had quietly protected him for years. And now the black SUV, the sheriff's warning, the feeling of being watched. Nothing about any of it felt accidental. Titan sat beside the truck while Caleb finished a cup of coffee from a roadside diner. The old German shepherd looked unusually restless. His ears constantly moved, listening, searching, almost as if he knew something Caleb didn't. The thought returned again. How had Titan known exactly where to go inside the cave? Not just the entrance, the chamber, the exact crate, the exact locations. The behavior made less sense the more Caleb thought about it. An hour later, they were climbing the mountain once again. The sky hung low and gray. Clouds drifted between the peaks. The wilderness felt isolated, ancient, silent. Titan moved faster than usual. His age seemed to disappear whenever they approached the cave. The dog almost appeared eager, excited. Caleb noticed it immediately. "You're acting like this place belongs to you." Titan glanced back, then continued forward. The cave entrance emerged from the snowy landscape exactly as before. Dark, waiting, timeless. The moment they arrived, Titan walked inside without hesitation. No fear, no uncertainty, no need for commands. Caleb followed. His flashlight beam illuminated familiar passages. The first chamber, the photographs, the journals, the preserved memories. He barely glanced at them this time. The answers he needed lay deeper. Titan clearly agreed. The German shepherd continued forward, past the first chamber, past the second. Into tunnels Caleb had not yet explored. The deeper they traveled, the stranger things became. More storage rooms appeared, more evidence of Daniel's years of work. Yet something else caught Caleb's attention. Certain paths showed signs of recent use. Not weeks, not months, years, regular traffic. Someone had traveled these routes repeatedly. The realization made sense. Daniel, of course. Yet as Caleb studied the footprints preserved in dusty sections of the cave floor, something seemed odd. There weren't just human tracks. There were canine tracks, large canine tracks, German shepherd tracks. His stomach tightened. No, that wasn't possible. He knelt, examined them carefully. The size matched, the shape matched, the stride matched. Titan. The tracks belonged to Titan. Caleb slowly stood. A strange feeling crept into his chest. Titan. The dog stopped, looked back. His brown eyes reflected the flashlight beam. Caleb stared at him. The pieces refused to fit together. Yet they were beginning to form a picture he wasn't ready to accept. They continued deeper. The cave widened again. Another chamber emerged, smaller, more personal. This room felt different from the others, less like storage, more like someone's private refuge. A wooden chair sat beside a lantern. A small table occupied one corner. Books lined rough shelves. Blankets rested neatly folded nearby. Someone had spent time here, a lot of time. Daniel's sanctuary, his hidden retreat. Then Caleb saw the photographs, hundreds of them, pinned carefully to a corkboard. Most featured mountain landscapes, wildlife, sunsets, snowstorms, but scattered among them were images that stopped him cold. Photographs of Titan, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Titan sleeping beside a campfire. Titan running through snow. Titan sitting beside a river. Titan standing proudly beside Caleb's truck. The dates beneath the images stretched back years. 5 years, 7 years, 9 years, more. Caleb stared in disbelief. How? His voice echoed softly. Titan walked toward the board, then sat beneath it, almost proudly, almost knowingly. The old dog seemed completely at home, as though he had stood in this exact spot many times before. A chill moved through Caleb. Then he noticed another shelf. Veterinary records, leashes, dog treats, toys, medication. Everything organized carefully, everything labeled, everything connected to Titan. A photograph rested nearby. Caleb picked it up. The image nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. Daniel Mercer sat beside Titan, smiling. The dog leaned comfortably against him. The date in the corner was only 2 years old. 2 years. The photograph was real, undeniable. Daniel and Titan knew each other. Not casually, not accidentally. They knew each other well. Caleb sat down heavily in the wooden chair. His mind raced. The implications were staggering. For years he had wandered these mountains, camping, fishing, hiking, trying to escape his demons, trying to outrun memories, and somehow, while Caleb wandered alone, Titan had been visiting Daniel. The realization felt impossible, Yet the evidence surrounded him. Another photo. Daniel bandaging Titan's front leg. Another. Titan sleeping beside the chair. Another. Daniel feeding him from a metal bowl. Then Caleb found the veterinary file, the final confirmation. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were treatment records from 6 winters earlier. Titan had been injured during a blizzard, a deep cut along his shoulder. The memory returned instantly. Caleb remembered that storm, remembered losing consciousness briefly from exposure, remembered waking inside his truck, remembered Titan lying beside him with a bandaged shoulder. At the time, he'd assumed a local veterinarian helped after they reached town, but the records revealed the truth. Daniel had treated the injury. Daniel had paid the bills. Daniel had remained anonymous, again, and again. The room blurred slightly. For years, Daniel had been protecting them both, watching from a distance, helping whenever he could, never asking for recognition, never revealing himself. Titan approached quietly. The dog rested his head on Caleb's knee. The gesture broke something inside him. Not completely, but enough. You knew. The words came softly. Titan remained still. You knew where he was. Silence. You knew him. The dog's tail moved once. Caleb laughed bitterly. Not because it was funny, because it hurt. Because somehow the dog had maintained a friendship neither human could manage. Titan had crossed the distance pride refused to cross. The old German shepherd had done what 2 stubborn men never could. The realization was heartbreaking, and beautiful, and devastating. A folded envelope sat beneath the veterinary records. Caleb opened it carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note, Daniel's handwriting. Simple, direct. If you're reading this, buddy, then Titan finally brought you here. I always knew he would. He's smarter than both of us. Take care of him. He's taken care of you longer than either of you realize. The note ended there, nothing more. Yet the message struck harder than pages of explanation. Titan had been part of Daniel's plan, not intentionally, not consciously. But somehow the dog had become a bridge between 2 broken men. A bridge neither man fully understood. The German shepherd rested quietly beside him. Gray around the muzzle now, older, slower, yet still carrying the same loyalty that had defined his entire life. The same loyalty that apparently extended to Daniel Mercer. A sudden noise echoed faintly through the cave. Metal, distant, subtle. Titan's head snapped upward instantly. His posture changed. Every muscle tightened. The emotional moment vanished. Training took over. The dog's eyes locked toward a deeper tunnel. Listening, watching, waiting. Caleb stood immediately. The sound came again, faint, almost impossible to hear. Somewhere deeper inside the mountain. Not natural, not random. Something else. Titan moved toward the tunnel entrance. Slowly, carefully. The dog no longer looked nostalgic or comfortable. Now he looked alert, protective, focused, as though another secret waited ahead. One far more dangerous than old memories. One that Daniel Mercer had hidden deeper than everything else. And for the first time since entering the cave, Caleb felt certain of something. Titan hadn't merely led him to Daniel's past. The dog was leading him toward the truth, and somewhere beyond the darkness, the biggest secret of all was waiting. The sound came again, metal against stone, faint, distant, yet unmistakably real. Caleb's heart switched off his flashlight for a moment. Instantly darkness swallowed everything. The cave became a world without shape, without color, without distance. Only sound remained. He listened carefully. The noise came once more. Somewhere ahead, deep inside the mountain, Titan stood frozen beside him. The old German shepherd's ears pointed toward the tunnel. Every muscle remained tense, focused, alert. Years of military service had taught Caleb one thing: trust the dog. Titan had never failed him, not once. The flashlight flicked back on. A pale beam cut through the darkness. Let's see what Daniel was hiding. Titan moved immediately. The tunnel ahead was narrower than any passage they had explored so far. The stone walls squeezed inward, the ceiling lowered. Old timber supports appeared at irregular intervals. Some looked ancient. Others appeared surprisingly recent. Daniel had reinforced this route, maintained it, protected it, for a reason. The deeper they traveled, the more isolated the world became. The sounds of dripping water faded. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Then Caleb noticed something unusual: electrical wiring, thin cables secured along one wall. His heartbeat accelerated. Someone had run power into the mountain. Not recently, years ago. Daniel's work. The realization deepened the mystery. What required electricity this far underground? The tunnel turned sharply, then descended. Titan slowed. His posture changed again. More cautious now. The dog sniffed repeatedly, evaluating, listening. Then the ground trembled. A subtle vibration, barely noticeable, yet enough. Caleb froze. His instincts immediately recognized the danger. The tunnel ceiling creaked. Wood groaned somewhere above them. Stone shifted. Titan. The German shepherd reacted instantly. The dog lunged toward him. A fraction of a second later, the ceiling partially collapsed. Rock exploded downward. Dust filled the passage. Stone shattered against stone. The roar echoed through the mountain. Caleb threw himself backward. Something struck his shoulder. Pain flared, then silence. Complete silence. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam like gray snow. For several seconds, neither moved, neither breathed. Then Caleb heard a soft whine. Titan. The dog emerged from the dust cloud, limping. A cut along his shoulder stained his fur dark. Not severe, but enough to make Caleb's stomach tighten. Titan. The German shepherd walked toward him anyway, ignoring his own injury, checking Caleb first, just as he always had. Caleb dropped to one knee. His hand moved across the dog's shoulder carefully. The wound was shallow, painful, not life-threatening. Still, the sight hurt. You never stop protecting me, do you? Titan's tail moved weakly. Once, only once. The collapse had blocked part of the tunnel, but not all of it. A narrow opening remained, just large enough. Caleb studied it, then looked at Titan. The dog stared toward the darkness beyond, waiting, determined. The answer was obvious. They were continuing. Carefully, they squeezed through the gap. The space beyond opened suddenly, and Caleb stopped. The sight before him erased every thought from his mind. A steel door, massive, industrial, hidden deep inside the mountain. His flashlight beam reflected off reinforced metal. The door looked completely out of place, as though someone had buried part of a military facility beneath the cave. Titan approached it immediately. No hesitation, no uncertainty. The dog had been here before, many times. Caleb knew it now. The realization no longer shocked him. The evidence was overwhelming. Daniel and Titan had shared this secret. Together, mounted beside the door, sat a keypad. Inactive. Dust covered it. Yet another detail caught Caleb's attention. A small note taped beside the handle, protected beneath plastic, his breath caught. Daniel's handwriting. If you've made it this far, brother, you've earned the truth. The words sent chills through him, brother. Not teammate, not friend, brother. Slowly, Caleb pulled the heavy door open. The hinges groaned. Then the room beyond appeared. He stared. Rows, thousands of rows. Boxes, cabinets, shelves, hard drives, documents, photographs, videotapes, electronic storage devices. The room was enormous, a hidden archive, a hidden investigation, a hidden war. The scale was staggering. Daniel had spent years building this, perhaps decades. Caleb stepped inside. The air felt different, controlled, protected, preserved. Every shelf was labeled, every file categorized, every detail organized with military precision. One label immediately caught his attention. Operation Black Horizon. His pulse stopped. The name hit like a hammer. Black Horizon. The mission. The mission that destroyed everything. The mission Caleb blamed Daniel for. The mission that ended careers, destroyed reputations, destroyed friendships, destroyed lives. His hands trembled. No. He moved closer, opened the first box. Inside sat military reports, operational summaries, intelligence assessments, witness statements, thousands of pages. Every document connected to Black Horizon, every piece carefully preserved. The next box contained video recordings. The next, satellite imagery. The next, financial records. The next, internal corporate correspondence. The deeper he looked, the more impossible the collection became. Daniel hadn't merely gathered evidence. He had built a case, a massive case, A 20-year investigation. Against someone. Against something. Titan sat quietly beside him, watching, waiting, as though he understood the importance of this moment. Then Caleb found the folder, marked simply, Primary Responsibility. His throat tightened. Slowly he opened it. Inside rested copies of emails, internal memos, contract records, executive communications. The logo at the top appeared repeatedly. Titan Security Dynamics, a private defense contractor. Caleb remembered the company. They supplied intelligence support during Black Horizon. At the time, nobody questioned them. Nobody suspected them. Nobody investigated them. According to official reports, the mission failure resulted from human error. Daniel's error. That had been the story. For 22 years, until now, Caleb's eyes scanned the documents, and everything changed. Emails revealed manipulated intelligence, altered reports, false threat assessments, executives knowingly providing inaccurate information, internal warnings ignored, financial incentives, contract extensions, profits, pages and pages of proof. The room seemed to tilt around him. His breathing slowed, dangerously slow. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Daniel had never betrayed him. Daniel had never betrayed the team. Both men had been victims, scapegoats, sacrificed to protect something much larger, something powerful, something wealthy, something connected. The realization struck with devastating force. 22 years. 22 years of hatred. 22 years of blame. 22 years of grief directed at the wrong man. Caleb sat down heavily. The folder slipped from his hands. Titan moved beside him immediately. The dog's injured shoulder brushed against his arm, steadying him, grounding him, keeping him present. The silence inside the archive felt enormous. The kind of silence that follows an explosion. The kind of silence that exists after a life changes forever. His eyes drifted across the endless rows of evidence. Daniel had spent decades collecting this, risking everything, protecting it, preserving it, waiting for someone, waiting for him. And suddenly the black SUVs made sense. Frontier Ridge, the surveillance, the questions, the pressure, the fear. They weren't searching for silver, or land, or property. They were searching for this, the truth. The truth someone desperately wanted buried. Caleb slowly looked toward Titan. The old German shepherd met his gaze, loyal, steady, unwavering. The dog had led him here, past memories, past grief, past misunderstandings, straight to the heart of Daniel Mercer's secret. And now there was no going back, because buried beneath a mountain in Colorado sat enough evidence to rewrite history. Enough evidence to clear Daniel's name. Enough evidence to clear Caleb's name. Enough evidence to expose people who had hidden behind lies for decades. The mission hadn't failed because of betrayal. The betrayal had happened long before the mission ever began. And somewhere among the endless shelves of Daniel's archive, one final answer still waited. The answer to why Daniel had sacrificed everything, including his own future, to protect Caleb Hart. For a long time, Caleb sat motionless inside the hidden archive. The steel room seemed impossibly quiet. Around him stood thousands of documents, 20 years of investigation, 20 years of sacrifice, 20 years of truth buried beneath a mountain. Yet none of it held his attention now. Only one question remained. Why? Why would Daniel Mercer give up everything? Why accept disgrace? Why allow the world to believe he was a failure? Why spend 2 decades protecting a man who hated him? Titan rested beside him. The old German shepherd's injured shoulder had stiffened, but the dog refused to leave his side, just as Daniel never had. The realization hurt more than Caleb could bear. His flashlight beam drifted across the shelves, then stopped. One final container sat alone on a desk near the far wall, smaller than the others. Simple, deliberate. A single label appeared on the lid, for Caleb. His breath caught. The room suddenly felt colder. He already knew who had written it. Slowly he crossed the archive. Each step echoed softly against the concrete floor. Titan followed. The dog remained close, protective, steady. Caleb's hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside rested a sealed envelope. Nothing else. No documents. No evidence. No reports. Just a letter. The handwriting instantly transported him backward through time. Daniel's handwriting, older now, shakier, but unmistakable. Caleb stared at it, his chest tightened. Part of him wanted to leave it unopened, because once he read it, everything would become real. The questions would end, the truth would begin. Finally, he broke the seal. The paper crackled softly. The first line nearly shattered him. Brother. The word alone was enough. Not Caleb, not heart, not teammate, not friend, brother. A lifetime of memories flooded back, training, deployments, campfires, jokes, arguments, laughter, the bond they once shared. The bond he'd spent 22 years pretending never existed. Caleb swallowed hard and continued reading. If you're reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you myself. I've replayed that mission in my head every day for 22 years, every single day. The words blurred briefly. He blinked, then continued. You deserve the truth. You deserved it a long time ago. The mission wasn't your fault, and it wasn't mine. The knot in Caleb's stomach tightened. His eyes moved faster now. When we discovered the intelligence had been manipulated, I reported it. I thought the system would protect the truth. I was wrong. The room seemed to shrink around him. Daniel's words continued. The contractor had powerful people protecting them. Powerful enough to bury evidence. Powerful enough to destroy careers. Powerful enough to choose who would take the blame. Caleb gripped the paper tighter. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. Then came the sentence that changed everything. They wanted someone to blame. At first, they chose you. Caleb froze. His breath stopped. The words sat there, impossible, unmovable, terrifying. At first, they chose you, he continued reading. You had a wife, a young son, a future outside the military. They believed destroying you would silence everyone else. I couldn't let that happen. The letter shook in his hands. A memory surfaced, a meeting after the mission, investigators, lawyers, closed doors, confusion, questions, accusations. He remembered how suddenly everything changed, how the pressure shifted, how attention moved away from him and onto Daniel. He never understood why, until now. Daniel had done it. He kept reading. I accepted responsibility because I knew what would happen if they came after you. They would have destroyed your family. They would have followed your son. They would have buried you completely. I couldn't let that happen. The words hit like physical blows. Caleb's vision blurred. His son, his marriage, his family, everything he'd lost later in life. Daniel had sacrificed himself to protect them, to protect him. The realization was devastating. The letter continued. I thought it would only last a few years. I thought the truth would come out. I thought someone would do the right thing. Nobody did. The loneliness within those sentences felt unbearable. Daniel had carried that burden alone, year after year, decade after decade. Caleb kept reading. The evidence grew. The conspiracy grew. The lies grew. And the more I learned, the more dangerous the truth became. So I started collecting everything. Every document. Every recording. Every witness statement. I built the archive because someday somebody needed to know what happened. That somebody was always you. Tears began forming. Caleb didn't stop them. For the first time in years, he didn't try. The mountain remained silent around him. Only Daniel's voice existed now. I wanted to contact you hundreds of times, maybe thousands. But how do you call someone after ruining their life? How do you explain that you sacrificed their future to save their family? How do you ask forgiveness for something like that? Caleb closed his eyes. Pain surged through him. Not anger, not anymore. Something worse. Regret. The purest form of regret. 22 years of blame. 22 years of hatred. 22 years stolen from both of them. The next paragraph nearly broke him. I followed your life from a distance. Not because I was spying. Because I worried. Because I cared. Because you were still my brother. The words struck deeper than anything before. I knew about the divorce. I knew about the PTSD. I knew about the nights you slept in your truck. I knew about the bad years, the very bad years, and I hated myself for every one of them. Caleb lowered the letter briefly. His hands were shaking. Titan moved closer. The dog's head rested gently against his leg. The familiar comfort nearly overwhelmed him. The letter continued. The only bright spot was Titan. That dog never stopped looking for the good in people. He visited me more times than you know. Sometimes I think he understood both of us better than we understood ourselves. A painful laugh escaped Caleb. Even now, Daniel found a way to tell the truth. Titan had bridged a divide neither man could cross. The old German shepherd lifted his head slightly, as if hearing his name, as if listening. Caleb continued reading. The final pages were shorter, more personal, the handwriting weaker. The doctor says my heart won't last much longer. Maybe he's right, maybe not. Either way, I don't have much time. If you're reading this, then I need one thing from you. Not revenge, not anger, not justice. Forgiveness. The word lingered. Heavy, powerful, simple. I already forgave you years ago. Please don't spend the rest of your life carrying what I've carried. The burden isn't worth it. Brotherhood is. The tears finally fell. Silent, unstoppable. The final paragraph waited below. I left you the cave because it was never about the cave. It was never about the archive. It was never about the evidence. It was about giving you a way home. Home to the truth. Home to yourself. Home to the brother you lost. The signature appeared beneath. Your brother always, Daniel. For several minutes, Caleb couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. The silence after the letter felt enormous, like the silence after a storm, like the silence after a war finally ends. Everything he believed about Daniel Mercer had been wrong. Everything. The man he blamed, the man he hated, the man he abandoned had sacrificed his own reputation, his own future, his own happiness, to protect Caleb, to protect Caleb's family, to protect people Daniel loved. The emotional weight was almost unbearable. Titan slowly climbed beside him. The injured German shepherd rested against his shoulder. No words, no commands, no training, just presence, just loyalty, just love. Exactly what Daniel had spent 22 years trying to preserve. Caleb stared at the final letter, then toward the endless shelves of evidence, then toward Titan. For the first time since entering the cave, one truth became undeniable. Daniel Mercer had never betrayed him. Daniel Mercer had saved him. And now Caleb understood why his friend had spent 20 years protecting the truth. Because some sacrifices were too important to die in darkness. Even if the man who made them never lived long enough to see the light. The letter remained open in Caleb Hart's hands. He had read the final paragraph 3 times. Then 4, then 5. Not because he hadn't understood it, because part of him still refused to believe it. The hidden archive sat silent around him. Rows of evidence, rows of truth, rows of sacrifices made by a man Caleb had spent 22 years blaming. Yet none of those discoveries hurt as much as the final words Daniel had written. Your brother always. Not your former teammate, not your old friend, not the man you hated, your brother, always. The simplicity of it was devastating. Caleb slowly lowered the letter. The steel room felt smaller now. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. For years anger had carried him. Anger gave structure to pain. Anger created certainty. Anger provided someone to blame. Without it, he felt exposed, vulnerable, lost. Titan remained beside him. The old German shepherd's breathing was slow and steady. His injured shoulder rested against Caleb's leg. Warm, comforting, real. The dog hadn't moved for nearly 20 minutes. As if he understood this moment required silence. Not action, not protection, only presence. Caleb stared at the floor. His mind drifted backward through the years. Memories surfaced one after another. Not the painful ones, not the mission, not the betrayal. The good ones, the forgotten ones. Daniel laughing beside a campfire. Daniel teaching younger SEAL candidates during training. Daniel carrying an injured teammate for miles because nobody got left behind. Daniel standing beside him at his wedding. The memory struck unexpectedly. Caleb closed his eyes. He remembered Daniel adjusting his tie, making jokes before the ceremony, telling him he was the luckiest idiot alive. The two of them laughing like brothers, because they had been brothers, in every way that mattered. The realization broke something inside him. The emotional wall he'd spent 2 decades building finally collapsed. Not dramatically, not all at once. Slowly, quietly, like a dam giving way after years of pressure. A tear landed on the letter, then another, then another. Caleb lowered his head. The grief arrived, not the grief of losing Daniel. That had happened years ago. This was different. This was grief for lost time, lost conversations, lost holidays, lost birthdays, lost opportunities. 22 years. 22 years stolen by lies. 22 years stolen by pride. 22 years neither man would ever get back. The weight of it became unbearable. His shoulders began shaking. The tears came harder now. Uncontrolled, raw, honest. The mountain listened. The archive listened. Titan listened. Nobody judged. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. For the first time in years, Caleb stopped fighting the pain. He let it happen. He let the grief speak. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped. His voice cracked. He laughed bitterly, then cried harder. "I'm sorry, Danny." The old nickname slipped out naturally. The name he hadn't spoken in decades. The name he'd buried alongside everything else. The sound echoed softly through the room. Danny. Not Daniel Mercer, not the man who betrayed him. Just Danny, his friend, his brother, the man he'd lost. Caleb rubbed his eyes. It didn't help. The memories kept coming. Fishing trips, deployments, training exercises, road trips. The 1,000 small moments that built a lifetime of friendship. Then came the painful questions. What if he had called? What if he had listened? What if he had forgiven? What if he had gone looking for answers 20 years earlier? What if Daniel hadn't spent 2 decades carrying the burden alone? The questions had no answers, only regret. Titan slowly lifted his head. The German shepherd nudged Caleb's arm. Once, twice, then rested his muzzle gently in Caleb's lap. The simple gesture nearly shattered him again. Because suddenly he understood. Titan had never stopped doing what Daniel did, showing up, staying, remaining loyal, no matter what. The dog represented everything Daniel had tried to preserve, everything Caleb almost lost. He ran a hand across Titan's gray fur. The old dog closed his eyes briefly. Content, trusting, safe. You knew him better than I did at the end. Titan's tail moved slightly. The dog offered no explanation. He didn't need to. His presence was answer enough. The silence stretched. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time seemed irrelevant inside the mountain. Eventually, Caleb stood. His legs felt weak. His eyes burned. Yet something inside him had changed. The anger was gone, not reduced, not hidden, gone. In its place remained sadness. Strangely peace, painful peace, but peace nonetheless. He picked up Daniel's letter once more, carefully folded it, placed it inside his jacket pocket, close to his heart, where it belonged. Then he looked around the archive again. For the first time, he didn't see evidence, or investigations, or conspiracies. He saw love. Every document represented years of sacrifice. Every shelf represented years of effort. Every file represented years of hope. Hope that someday the truth would reach the one person Daniel never stopped caring about. The one person Daniel never stopped believing in. Caleb. Titan slowly stood. The dog winced slightly from his shoulder injury. The movement reminded Caleb of something important. The old German shepherd had been injured protecting him. Again, even here, even now. Some things never changed. He knelt beside the dog, carefully examined the wound. Still shallow, still manageable. But it needed cleaning. "Let's get you home, partner." Titan's ears lifted. Home. The word felt strange. Because for years, Caleb hadn't really had one. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. Yet somehow Daniel had understood that. The cave was never the inheritance. The archive was never the inheritance. The evidence was never the inheritance. The inheritance was a path back to himself, back to truth, back to forgiveness, back to home. The realization settled quietly inside him. Outside, beyond the mountain, darkness had already fallen. Snow drifted through the Colorado wilderness. The world continued turning, unaware that one man's life had changed forever beneath the mountain. Before leaving, Caleb turned toward the archive one final time. The flashlight beam moved across the shelves, across the documents, across Daniel's life's work. Then he spoke softly, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. "I forgive you." The words felt right, natural, necessary. The silence answered. Not empty silence. comfortable silence. The kind shared between old friends who no longer need explanations. The kind shared between brothers. Titan moved toward the tunnel, waiting, ready. Caleb followed. The journey out felt different than the journey in. The darkness no longer felt threatening. The mountain no longer felt mysterious. The cave no longer felt haunted, because now he understood what Daniel had spent 22 years trying to tell him. Love survives silence. Love survives distance. Love survives mistakes. Sometimes it even survives death. As Caleb and Titan disappeared into the tunnels, leaving the hidden archive behind, the mountain settled once more into stillness. The war inside Caleb's heart was finally ending. And for the first time in more than 2 decades, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Because Daniel Mercer had given him something far more valuable than evidence. He had given him the freedom to let go. But freedom was not the same thing as justice. 3 days later, dawn broke cold over the San Juan Mountains. Snow covered the ridges. Frost coated the pine trees. And for the first time in years, Caleb's heart woke with purpose. His aging pickup sat outside the small veterinary clinic in Cedar Ridge. Titan rested on a blanket in the passenger seat. The German shepherd's injured shoulder had been treated the previous afternoon. The veterinarian had assured Caleb the wound would heal. The old dog simply needed rest. Titan seemed annoyed by that recommendation. He clearly preferred adventure. Caleb smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile he'd worn in a very long time. Then his phone rang. The number belonged to Rachel Bennett, an investigative journalist from Denver. The same journalist Daniel had referenced several times in the archive. Caleb answered. "Mr. Hart? That's me." Rachel's voice carried urgency. "I finished reviewing the files you sent." A pause followed. Then she spoke carefully. "Do you understand what you have?" Caleb looked toward the snowy mountains. "I think I'm starting to." "No," Rachel said quietly. "I don't think you do." The seriousness in her voice caught his attention. "Those files don't expose one contractor." Another pause. "They expose an entire network." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Rachel continued. "Defense contractors, consultants, federal subcontractors, political donors, people with influence, people with money, people who don't want these records becoming public." The warning hung in the air. Caleb already suspected as much. Still, hearing it confirmed brought a new level of reality. "This can clear Daniel's name?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. And yours." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. 22 years. 22 years reduced to a single answer. "Yes." "You still willing to move forward?" Rachel asked. Caleb glanced toward Titan. The old dog watched him quietly, waiting, trusting. The answer came easily. "Yes," Sussex hailed. "Then be careful." The call ended. And almost immediately Caleb noticed something troubling. A black SUV parked across the street. The vehicle hadn't been there earlier. Its windows were tinted, the engine running, the driver unseen. Caleb stared at it. The SUV remained motionless, watching. A familiar feeling returned. Not fear, awareness. The feeling every SEAL learned to trust. Someone was paying attention. Someone knew. The realization didn't surprise him. The evidence had been hidden for decades. People had worked very hard to keep it buried. Now the truth was moving, and powerful people were beginning to notice. Titan suddenly growled, low, soft, dangerous. The dog's eyes locked onto the SUV. Caleb's instincts sharpened immediately. Without making it obvious, he climbed into his truck, started the engine, pulled onto the road. The SUV remained parked. At first, then it moved, falling in several cars behind, not aggressive, not obvious, but there, following. The old Caleb might have panicked. The broken Caleb from years ago might have run. But the man who emerged from Daniel's cave felt different. Steadier, stronger. The road curved through snow-covered valleys. The SUV remained behind, patient, professional. Caleb drove directly to Sheriff Wade Collins. The sheriff listened carefully, then walked to the window. His expression darkened immediately. "Still there?" Caleb nodded. Wade sighed. "I was afraid of this." The sheriff returned to his desk. For several moments he said nothing, then finally spoke. "Daniel came to me 3 years ago." Caleb looked up. "What?" Wade nodded. He didn't tell me everything, but he told me enough. The sheriff's eyes drifted toward the mountains. He knew people were watching. He knew somebody wanted something hidden. He asked me to keep an eye on things if anything happened to him. Caleb absorbed the revelation silently. Another person Daniel trusted, another layer of preparation, another example of the man thinking ahead, always thinking ahead. He expected this? Caleb asked. Wade nodded again. Absolutely. The sheriff opened a drawer, removed a folder, placed it on the desk. Daniel left instructions. Caleb stared. The folder contained names, phone numbers, lawyers, journalists, former military investigators, people scattered across the country, people Daniel trusted, people prepared to act, even after death. A strange feeling rose inside Caleb. Pride. For the first time in decades, he felt proud of Daniel, proud to have known him, proud to have served beside him, proud to call him brother. The next week became a storm. Rachel Bennett published the first article, then another, then another. News outlets picked up the story. Military publications followed. Questions spread rapidly. Former operators came forward. Retired intelligence analysts came forward. Witnesses once too afraid to speak finally spoke. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The truth began moving faster than anyone could stop it. Then the threats started. Anonymous calls, anonymous emails, vehicles parked outside places Caleb visited. Nothing direct, nothing illegal, but enough. Enough to remind him powerful people were nervous. One evening he returned to the cave and discovered something that made his blood run cold. The entrance had been vandalized, equipment destroyed, storage containers broken, documents scattered, not stolen, damaged, a warning. Titan growled immediately. The old dog moved through the site carefully, searching, protecting, watching. Caleb stood silently. Anger flickered inside him. Not the old anger. Not hatred. Something different. Determination. They weren't attacking him. They were attacking Daniel, attacking his memory, attacking the truth. That changed everything. The next morning, Caleb released every remaining archive file. Every document, every video, every witness statement, everything. Daniel had prepared for this possibility. Multiple backups existed. Cloud storage, law firms, journalists, veteran organizations. The truth spread faster than anyone could contain. By the end of the month, congressional inquiries had begun. Investigations reopened. Contractors faced scrutiny. Executives resigned. The story dominated headlines. And finally, after 22 years, the official review board issued its findings. Caleb sat beside Titan in a motel room when the announcement arrived. The old German shepherd slept quietly on the bed, his shoulder nearly healed. Rachel called. Her voice shook. Caleb. He immediately knew. What happened? A long pause followed. Then came the words he never expected to hear. They cleared you. The room fell silent. Rachel continued. They cleared Daniel too. Caleb closed his eyes. His chest tightened. Not from pain, not from grief. Relief. Pure relief. The report says neither of you were responsible. The words felt unreal, like hearing someone else's story. The mission failure resulted from manipulated intelligence. Rachel's voice softened. Daniel Mercer is officially exonerated. Caleb couldn't speak. For several seconds, no words came. 22 years. Gone. One sentence. One truth. One correction. Finally, he whispered, he deserved better. Rachel's voice broke slightly. Yes, he did. The call ended. Caleb sat quietly. Titan lifted his head. The old dog sensed something. Always did. Caleb moved closer, wrapped both arms around him. The German shepherd accepted the embrace without complaint. Outside, snow drifted softly across Cedar Ridge. The mountains stood silent, unchanged, eternal. Yet everything had changed. The truth was finally public. The lies were finally broken. And Daniel Mercer was no longer remembered as a man who failed. He would be remembered as what he truly was: a loyal friend, a brave operator, a protector, a brother. But as Caleb looked toward the dark outline of the mountains beyond the motel window, he understood something else. Justice was not the end of Daniel's story. It was only the beginning of his legacy. And together, Caleb and Titan still had one final promise to keep. 1 year later, Summer sunlight spilled across the San Juan Mountains. The snow had retreated to distant peaks. Wildflowers painted the valleys in gold, purple, and crimson. Pine trees swayed gently beneath a cloudless Colorado sky. The mountain looked peaceful, alive, protected, exactly as Daniel Mercer had hoped. The old cave remained where it had always been, hidden beneath granite cliffs, overlooking the same valley, watching the same sunrise. But everything around it had changed. A wooden sign stood near the entrance, handcrafted, simple, beautiful. The Mercer Hart Veterans Sanctuary. The letters had been carved by Caleb himself, every cut made by hand, every detail intentional. Beneath the name sat a smaller inscription, dedicated to those who carried burdens too heavy to carry alone. People stopped there every day, veterans, families, retired handlers, military working dog teams. Some arrived seeking help, others arrived seeking peace. Most arrived carrying wounds nobody could see, and somehow the mountain helped. The sanctuary had grown far beyond anything Caleb imagined. The abandoned cave now served as the centerpiece of a place dedicated to healing. Cabins dotted the nearby hillsides. Walking trails wound through the forest. Quiet overlooks provided space for reflection. Therapy programs helped struggling veterans rebuild their lives. Retired military dogs found safe homes. Former handlers reunited with old companions. No advertisements, no publicity campaigns, just people helping people. Exactly the way Daniel would have wanted. Caleb stood outside the main lodge watching the morning activity. Veterans shared coffee on the porch. A retired Marine laughed with an Army medic near the fire pit. Two former handlers walked the trails with aging service dogs. The sounds were simple, normal, human. For a man who had spent years living alone inside an aging pickup truck, the sight still felt miraculous. The sanctuary had given purpose back to his life, something he thought he'd lost forever. A familiar bark interrupted his thoughts. Caleb smiled immediately. Titan, the old German shepherd, trotted across the grass. Slower now, older, his muzzle completely gray. The injury from the cave had healed months ago, though a slight limp remained during colder mornings. Yet, despite age and injury, Titan remained the heart of the sanctuary. Visitors loved him. Veterans trusted him. Children followed him everywhere. And somehow, the old dog seemed to understand exactly what each person needed. Sometimes that meant sitting quietly beside someone struggling through memories. Sometimes it meant nudging a hand that hadn't smiled in weeks. Sometimes it simply meant being present, just as he had always been. Titan reached Caleb and sat beside him. His tail brushed softly against the grass. The familiar gesture warmed Caleb's heart. You've become more famous than I have. Titan blinked, unimpressed. The response made Caleb laugh, a real laugh. The kind he once believed he would never experience again. A voice called from behind him. Morning, Caleb. Rachel Bennett approached carrying a folder beneath one arm. The investigative journalist visited frequently now. The sanctuary had become one of her favorite places, not because of the story, because of what the story had created. Morning, Rachel. She handed him the folder. The foundation numbers. Caleb opened it. His eyes widened slightly. Every year the Mercer Foundation expanded. Scholarships, housing assistance, veteran support programs, service dog care, emergency funding, everything Daniel had dreamed about. Everything the cave had ultimately made possible. The truth had changed lives, far more lives than either man could have imagined. Rachel smiled. Looks like another record year. Caleb looked toward the mountains. Daniel would have liked that. Rachel nodded softly. I think so too. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. The kind shared by people who no longer needed many words. Eventually, Rachel excused herself. Work awaited. Visitors arrived daily. Stories never stopped. Caleb remained standing with Titan, watching, thinking, remembering. As afternoon faded into evening, one final task remained. The same task he performed every Sunday. The same promise he never missed. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking Cedar Ridge. Small, quiet, peaceful. The wind moved gently through the grass. Birds called from distant trees. Sunlight painted everything gold. Caleb walked slowly along the path. Titan remained beside him, always beside him. They reached the grave together. Daniel Mercer. The headstone stood simple and strong, nothing elaborate, nothing unnecessary. Exactly the kind of marker Daniel would have chosen. Fresh flowers rested near its base. Someone had visited earlier. That happened often. More people remembered Daniel now. More people understood. More people knew the truth. Caleb knelt carefully. For a long moment he simply sat there, looking at the stone, thinking, feeling, remembering. Then he removed something from his jacket, a small velvet case. He opened it gently. Inside rested a Navy SEAL trident, recovered after the official review cleared Daniel's name. Restored, returned, earned. Caleb stared at it for several seconds. The symbol represented service, sacrifice, brotherhood, everything Daniel embodied. Slowly, he placed it beside the headstone. The metal gleamed in the fading sunlight. The gesture felt right, necessary, complete. Titan sat quietly nearby, watching, waiting, listening. The old dog understood this place, understood this ritual, perhaps better than anyone. Caleb smiled faintly, then spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. You carried me when I couldn't carry myself, brother. The words drifted into the evening air. Simple, true, enough. His eyes moved toward the mountains beyond town, toward the cave, toward the sanctuary, toward everything Daniel had protected, everything Daniel had preserved, everything Daniel had ultimately given away. The inheritance had never been the cave. It had never been the archive. It had never been the evidence. The inheritance was truth. The inheritance was forgiveness. The inheritance was purpose. The inheritance was home. For years, Caleb believed home was a place, a building, an address, a destination. He understood differently now. Home was where love remained. Home was where loyalty endured. Home was where people chose each other despite pain, despite mistakes, despite time. Titan slowly stood. The old German shepherd nudged Caleb's hand, a gentle reminder. The sun was setting, the day was ending. Life continued. Caleb rose to his feet. One final glance at the headstone. One final silent thank you. Then he turned toward the path. Titan walked beside him, as always. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. The valley stretched endlessly before them, beautiful, peaceful, whole. And as Caleb and Titan disappeared down the hill together, he realized something extraordinary. The story that began with grief had ended with gratitude. The story that began with betrayal had ended with truth. The story that began with a worthless cave had ended with a legacy. Because love preserved is never truly lost. Sometimes it waits patiently in the darkness, until someone is finally ready to come home. If this story reminded you that forgiveness can be just as powerful as justice, comment yes below. And if you've ever had someone stand by you when life got hard, let us know where you're watching from and who that person was. Subscribe and join us for more stories of loyalty, perseverance, and second chances here in the land of the free.